Logic podcast, and today I have Concrete Bob Higgins with me. He's back,
I'm
and yeah, yeah. And today we're going to talk about challenges and misconceptions in curing high performance concrete, and whatever else we feel like talking about. But before we get started, just to remind you how to support the podcast, there are a few ways. One is if you learned something from Concrete Bob today, please share the episode. Don't be greedy or selfish. Uh, get the word out. The next couple things you can do is go to concretelogicpodcast.com, and on the homepage there's a couple ways to get a hold of me. There's a contact button in the upper right hand corner. You click on that. That's like shooting me an email. And then the bottom right hand corner, there's a little microphone. Click on that, and you can leave me a voicemail. And what we're looking for are topics or guests that you want to hear on the show, because this is what this podcast is about: is to talk about the things you want to learn about and to talk to the people you want to hear from. So you got to jump on there and do that. And then I'd ask you too is we got a new endeavor here called Concrete Logic Academy. Go to www.concretelogicacademy.com. Check it out. So we're creating a community focused on the concrete industry. It's for folks um, that are enthusiasts of the concrete industry, want to see things get better, and talk about things that maybe some of the associations out there are scared to talk about. But you want to go on there and join. We got a growing group over there, so you want to check that out as well. Um, all right, Bob. So we're going to talk about again the topic of the day is challenges and misconceptions in curing high performance concrete. Um, it's your floor. You get started, and I'll jump in.
okay. With high performance and ultra high performance concrete, there are considerations that haven't been really addressed because they put in these additives in secondary cements. I've always called them secondary cements. They'll call them supplemental, and there's all kinds of different names for them. But nevertheless, it's not the primary cement, but they're trying to encourage the byproduct of the initial cement formation to stimulate more cement growth. It's basically what it is. That's the simplest way to put it. I'm going to try to avoid all the technical terms here. I'm going to keep them generalized. Then if people want me to get more specific, I'm more than happy to, but I'm going to keep it fairly generalized right now. So what happens when they place high performance and ultra high performance concrete, there's very little water in the mix. And that is good and bad. The good is there's not a lot of pore space, and there's not a lot of permeability when you have a very low amount of water. The problem is there's not enough water. So what happens, especially towards the surface of the concrete, and if the concrete is placed in elevated temperatures, the warmer the temperatures get, the less cement development there is. And it piles on as it gets warmer and warmer and warmer. It inhibits the development of the primary cement. So then you've got this cascading effect where if the primary cement doesn't form the byproduct that the secondary cement wants to react with, well, it doesn't do anything. It just sits around and does nothing. And the other thing is during the initial cement formation, everything you put in there, it's a dry particle, especially these tiny little particles they put in, the fly ash, the silica fume, or whatever they're using. The larger the surface area, the more difficult it is to wet it. So with really small particles, if you can do this is analogous to anything. If you take a coarse grind, you pour water in, it'll go right through. Now, you can take the same volume of material, grind it finer, in a much finer grind, and you pour the water in, and it starts interrupting the water because it has more areas to wet, so it doesn't make it to the bottom. And as you keep getting finer and finer, it actually stops. It can stop right at the surface and absorbs all the water. That's the problem we're having.
Yeah.
It was really that simple.
You know what that remind me of when you're talking about that? I love coffee. And
Yes.
yeah, when you're grinding your
Coffee's
coffee
a
beans,
perfect analogy. Go for
yeah.
it.
Oh, so yeah, so if I'm not a, a total coffee geek, but I do grind my own beans at home. And when you grind coffee, the finer you grind the beans, the slower the drip is when you're making your coffee. So, um, I like to do like pour over coffee.
Yeah.
So if you don't grind it right, to the right fineness, you'll notice that the water goes through the coffee beans really, really quickly, and then the taste of it is terrible. Versus if you get the right grind, it's so much smoother and it tastes so much better. But on the flip side, you could also grind it too fine, right? To a
Yes.
point where the water is too it goes through too slow, and then it also you get a bad taste as well. Is
Yeah,
that
it gets muddy and it gets
yeah,
bitter. Oh yeah.
yeah.
Also,
I think that's how Starbucks makes their coffee, because I think their coffee tastes terrible. But
well, always bring a little bit of baking soda with you. If you put a pinch of baking soda in bitter coffee, takes the bitterness right out.
oh, I heard salt is good too for
Oh,
that.
salt does it too, but baking soda at least lowers the acid as well, so it helps keep you from getting heartburn.
Oh, I'm gonna have to try that one. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry,
Okay.
sorry to interrupt your flow.
I'm
Keep
geeking
go.
out here.
We'll talk. We'll have to start a coffee podcast.
Well, that is a really good analogy.
Yeah.
It's the same with anything though. If you have a fine grind of anything, it takes a lot more liquid to wet it out. So that's the challenge of the high performance and ultra high performance concrete. And if it warms up, that works against you, because what happens, the byproduct, this alkaline byproduct, becomes increasingly less soluble as the temperature goes up. So what it does, it starts blocking part of the unhydrated cement particle, which is called the clinker. So that even slows it down even worse. So you have all these things piling up and piling up and piling up to give you a really bad concrete surface. So they're finding in these field studies all over the globe, this is happening over and over again. Where it really was dramatic to me and got my attention first was domestically. The Texas Transportation Institute, the lead researchers, Dan Zollinger. So anyway, he did some mock-ups in the lab, and he used a moderately strong concrete, not a high performance or ultra high performance, but he wanted to see if there'd be a difference between the concrete surface and the remainder of the concrete, because they were using the standard compression strength break. So they did one concrete with just air cure, and the other one was a 7-day water cure. Well, 7-day water cure, what I was taught and hammered in and hammered in and hammered in, if you keep the concrete wet, it will hydrate all the cement. Well, it turns out that's not true. In fact, a lot of what we've been taught is not true. So we have to kind of unlearn a lot of the garbage we've been told, because what was true maybe back in the 1920s, 1950s, and even through most of the 1980s was true, but that concrete no longer exists. We're dealing with a different animal.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're dealing with a different animal, the rules change. But we haven't changed the rules. We're still applying the same old logic to a newer product, and we can't do that.
Yeah, Joe Shetterly and we talked about that on a podcast, that we're using the same water cement ratio calculations that we used 100 years ago.
Yes,
And
exactly.
we
And the curing, same things. Curing is basically over 100 years old, the methodology. So when Dr. Zollinger water cured that concrete for 7 full days, just keeping it wet, he sliced off the top inch of the concrete, and the top inch was still had a 20% lower compressive value than the remainder of the concrete. Now, the only way that can happen is if something happens to interrupt the cement development. And what I've been seeing with these other studies in the meantime, I started doing a search, and I wanted to do it globally because I wanted to find out, is this regional? Is this global? What is it? Or am I going down the wrong path? So I found these studies from the Middle East and from Portugal, of all things. Portugal has some really good studies on this. I have to give them kudos. They really took a deep dive into this. But what they did is they were using not only RH probes, they were using embedded RH meters as well as thermocouples. And I thought that's very clever because they wanted to see if there was a correlation between the temperature and the relative humidity being maintained in the concrete. And it turns out, and this ended up being verified in other areas of the globe, that in the first 2 to 3 weeks after the concrete's placed, the relative humidity in the top inch of the concrete plummets. Mm-hmm. It doesn't stay at 80% and higher, which is what is needed to form cement. It drops as low as 50 to 60%. I was shocked.
Yeah.
Well, once that happens, there's no recovery. You might be able to still stimulate some more cement, but whatever's been blocked at that point is no longer available to develop. So now you've got an inherently weaker surface. And this has been repeated over and over again globally.
Why can't you re-wet it and to initiate that process again in that top surface?
They're not quite sure, but I've hypothesized that basically it forms a crust, and that crust is very it's not hydrophobic, but it's not really hydrophilic either. It's not hydrophilic, it's not hygroscopic. It's just there. It acts like a regular aggregate. So it doesn't really want to wet out and then produce more cement because it's got to get through that crust. Mm-hmm. Now, if you crushed it again, it would probably re-stimulate it. But we don't have that opportunity because it's already hardened, it's already in there.
Yeah.
So really the only thing that I've seen that has value is then I started going down that rabbit hole, and they were using things like super absorbent polymers, and then they were finding out, which was kind of funny because it's a bit of an embarrassment to the concrete industry, they were really shellacking the absorptive aggregates. Don't use that because it interferes with the water cement ratio and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not true. If you put a water absorbing aggregate in, as long as the surface dry, you mix it in with the concrete, it acts as a reservoir, and it's actually giving you a better cure of the concrete. It helps develop more cement because now you've got a reserve where the water can feed in.
Yeah, like lightweight aggregate is what you're talking about. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, even if it's not lightweight, as long as it's absorptive aggregate, they really need to start moving towards that. Mm-hmm. I like that. No matter what they do to make the concrete self-curing or internally cured, I think they should put in at least a percentage of absorptive aggregate, because the more water source you have that doesn't interfere with the initial water cement ratio, the better concrete you're going to have. Because nothing's better for concrete than sticking it underwater. Mm-hmm. If you can keep it wet the entire time, it's really happy and it gets really, really strong.
What are those aggregates like? What is an example of the absorptive?
Like an expanded shell, or some of these pumice stones, that kind of thing. But you have to make sure it's also not reactive, because if it's too amorphous, where it's not crystalline, it tends to dissolve over a period of time and can help form ASR. So you got to be kind of selective about what you take. You want to make sure it's not a reactive aggregate. Mm-hmm. So they have to be selective with that. So I'd have to explore that a little deeper. I haven't really taken a dive into that.
Yeah. I'm wondering, I've seen some people posting on LinkedIn lately about a company. I'm not going to say their name, but they got a bunch of money from the feds. I guess they sold them on, it was some green material or something. And just reading a little bit about it, kind of sounds like that they're using some kind of absorptive type aggregate, I think. I don't know. It's one of those people that are hiding behind some IP or something. They're not sharing what they're doing.
Yeah, and the thing I found, and I'm going to come right out and say it, I found no exception to this. The harder it is to find who funds something and who's behind the testing, the more distrusting I am because they have an agenda. And I don't know what it is because I want to see the data, but I want to know the context.
I know what their agenda is. They're getting the free money, the grant money. That's what it's all
Oh, yeah.
about. We're that is the purpose, I would say, of 95% of what's going on out there right now is people are just trying to get the free money that's hanging out there, the Inflation Reduction Act stuff, the infrastructure money, all that stuff out there. Most of the things, if you just follow what they're doing, that's that's like their their goal. They're not here to fix concrete. They're here to get some money to keep their thing going. That's
Well, I'll do a little. I'll do a little. I'm going to take a deeper dive into that one now that you brought that up. Okay, Seth, you and I, we're gonna have a partnership because what we're going to do is we're going to add this magical additive to concrete that's going to bring the internal relative humidity down. So when the relative humidity down is below, say, 85 or 80%, we can control it. My God, that's waterproof, isn't it? At least that people think, because they're saying, let's target 75 and 80%. Well, anybody who targeted that doesn't know anything about concrete anyway, because why would you interrupt the cement development for a lower relative humidity? That doesn't make any sense.
yeah.
But let's run with it. Let's just say they're right. So now we're going to take our magic juice and they're going to throw it in the concrete. And my God, look at that. Every single time we can put enough in, dose it, where we can get to 75% every single time, no matter what. So now when somebody puts a coating or a floor on it and it fails later on, it's not our fault because we met the specifications, didn't we? Well, that magic juice is see sodium nitrate, for example. If you take sodium nitrate, that is a common salt used in museums where they'll put that under glass to help preserve and keep the relative humidity from spiking, so it doesn't damage these delicate fabrics and bones and whatever else they're trying to display. So in the display cases, they control the relative humidity. It is really easy to do because I did that with a concrete company. They had a waterproof concrete. It was waterproof. There was no extra water, no free water, but they kept flunking the RH test. They kept getting 95%, 95%, and that would persist for months because the concrete has no connecting capillaries, so there's no reason for the relative humidity to drop. So basically you had all these little steam rooms in there where the water wasn't going anywhere, the water vapor. So to fool it, I had them add the salt to it. So we experimented with it till we brought it down to what was specified. Was the moisture content any different? No, but we brought down the relative humidity. Now, we could do that and get all kinds of grant money and all kinds of government money because, boy, we just met this target because, again, they hit these targets that have no context.
No purpose.
No, well, they have a purpose, like you said, make money.
But it does.
There's no context. It doesn't do anything to help. It meets a goal or standard that somebody threw out there, but they don't understand the context of what they threw out there. That is the problem. I mean, I deal with this constantly, and I was talking to a couple of these people and debating with them and said, why are you using the circular logic? What you're doing is a technical hamster wheel. We're going around and around in circles and we're not going anywhere. Let's take these things and deconstruct what we're doing, go back to root cause analysis, then we can fix the problem. So I've been going out there and helping people fix the problem. It's been very gratifying because I got out of the construction defect litigation portion of it, which was very profitable, but then I was just part of the system. I was part of the problem. I was just perpetuating all this garbage, and I wasn't willing to do it. So I stepped away from that. And this is a goal that I have, which I'm so glad you have this program, because if we get this good information to people, they're going to stop repeating the same mistakes we make over and over again. And we're dealing with legacy issues. And that's a tough one to deal with, because there's people. I've been doing this for 30 years. So what? 30 years ago, the concrete was different. Just go back to 2002 to 2018. when the Environmental Protection Agency required that the cement producers basically reincorporate some of the flue gases, the cement kiln dust, back into the cement production. Well, that's made all cement more alkaline. So the big announcement they did in 2019 was there's no more low alkali cement available. Why? Well, I read all the articles on it and they never explain why. Because if they explain why, people would panic because now the concrete is more alkaline than it used to be. So this alkaline issue that we've seen historically has gotten worse. And they don't know why. So let's put less water in it. No, that makes it worse. There's no logic being applied to what we're actually dealing with.
So when it's more alkaline, that's when the salts build up on the surface, and that's when we think the moisture's coming up through the concrete, right?
Yes, because we have that weakened upper inch, the gradient layer of the concrete.
Yeah.
Now the gradient layer, really interestingly, irrespective of the thickness of the concrete, remains between 3/4 of an inch to an inch. And that's been consistent with all these different studies that don't even know about each other, which I find one of the most compelling things. That and then what this also does, it gives a complexity to concrete where I always take issue where somebody tries to tell me what the precision and bias is of this concrete. I said, there is no precision and bias. The concrete is dynamic. There is no precision and bias. Every piece of concrete that you put down is going to have its own hygroscopic moisture content. It's going to hold a certain amount of water, and you have to establish your dry point based on the environment of that concrete. Because all you have to do is just go to the different climates, and it's really obvious. If you go to the desert, say over in Phoenix, Arizona, and you put a concrete meter down on the concrete, and it reaches 3.5%, that's too high of a moisture content. But 4.5% in Florida is dry. That's because of its environment. That's its natural equilibrium point. We're not dealing with the equilibrium points of the concrete we're dealing with. So if you put another thing down, such as a lightweight concrete, they try to apply the same logic to lightweight concrete as regular strength concrete. It doesn't go. It's a different species of concrete. Just like self-leveling underlayments. They have a higher moisture content than concrete. So what? It's not excess moisture. It's not going to invade the concrete. It's not going to destroy the floor. But people keep putting this single mark on all these different species, and that'd be like putting a single mark on the species of woods. If you did that with the wood industry for hardwoods, the floor, 95% of them would fail because they all have different hygroscopic levels. They all have different levels of equilibrium. And that's perfectly okay. But we have to recognize that, and we're not doing that. We're completely missing the logic. And the concrete logic.
Yeah. I think I've knocked you off the track of where we were going with the ultra high performance.
But actually, this all ties in with the high performance concrete because they're depending on this high performance concrete based on false precepts. They're not recognizing these precepts and incorporating them into these mixed designs. If they want high performance and ultra high performance concrete to work properly, it has to become a self-curing material. There are materials you can put in the concrete to make it self-curing, but they're not using it. And they're even going out to these outside things, like I told you earlier, like these super absorbent polymers. Mm-hmm. Well, they act as water reservoirs, but I don't trust them because they're organic. Organic materials, when they break down, they're going to have a decomposition material that's not favorable for concrete. I do not like that. I like, if you stick with an aggregate, you stick with something like colloidal silica, go with something like that. Go like with like. If it's inorganic, stay inorganic. If it's organic, stay organic. When you mix and match, you start having these reactions that you can't really predict.
Yeah.
So yeah, it ties directly in with the ultra high performance concrete. We need to put in concrete that's self-curing, internally cured. because I saw a study, and I got really excited where they they had this colloidal silica. It was done at Purdue University, and for the very first time, and I've never seen it before, where the top surface of the concrete, the inch was actually denser than the remainder of the concrete.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an achievable goal. So people say, well, you can't do that. Yes, you can. Just because you don't know you can doesn't mean it's not there. That technology is out there, and I know of at least 3 different technologies where you can get concrete where it's damn near indestructible. We could have concrete last hundreds of years rather than dozens. But we're not doing it because nobody wants to move off the legacy issues. This is the way we've always done it, so we're going to continue to do it this way.
Mm-hmm. Even with the cement's changing every day, we're still choosing to go the same, using the same methods. Um, so we touch on, so we touched on steam curing. Um, I'm trying to get us
Yeah, I
back
can
on.
go into steam curing a little bit more because we discussed that before the show
Well,
started, actually.
yeah, and we want to touch on that sweating slab syndrome too.
Yeah. And again, those tie in as well. If you look at steam cured concrete, it was supposed to make concrete much more durable. And for the most part, it does. The interior section of the concrete is extremely durable. I'm not going to go into the technical issues of that because it's pretty complicated, but it super saturates the interior section of the concrete. But what it does, it desiccates the surface of the concrete rapidly. Since the 1940s until today, it's been proven over and over and over. If you expose concrete to elevated temperatures, it inhibits the long-term durability, increases the permeability of the concrete. I don't know why they keep doing that. So when you steam cure concrete, if you put, say, a precast concrete side by side with a standard poured concrete, if you throw water on the standard poured concrete, it'll just sit there and it'll eventually soak in. Whereas you can take the same cup of water, throw it on a precast, and the water disappears instantly. It's extremely permeable. The reason why it's extremely permeable is you damaged it with heat.
Mm-hmm.
And the heat damages are irreversible. There's nothing you can do to recover that other than to treat it with something, put a coating on it, which you shouldn't do because then you're going to cause other issues. So the best way to control that would be to, again, make the concrete somewhat self-curing. So if you could put something in that could at least dissipate some of the heat, you could probably lessen the damage. And again, that one's a little bit more complicated. I don't want to get into that, but I have some ideas on how that can be done. But at this point, one I would call it estimate rather than a study because I never saw any of the information on it. But they estimated that the permeability of precast concrete is about 30% higher than that of standard concrete. And they're trying to get it down to where it's about at least even with standard concrete. And in the last 20 some odd years or so, they haven't been able to do it. So that tells you what a challenge that is. And that's being done very quietly because you can imagine that this had a lot of noise behind it. People would get really worked up and concerned.
Yeah,
And some of the concern would be irrational. Probably the best way to put it.
I gotcha. Yeah, precasters don't want people to know that.
Yeah.
So that, so we're saying steam curing isn't ideal. Is that a common practice? I mean,
Yeah,
steam curing.
pre-stressed and precast concrete, most of it, if not all of it now, is they use high temperature and steam curing. So
Yeah.
yeah, they're pretty much all in the same boat. Just some are worse than others.
And they're just doing that so they can to pull their product out of the forms as quickly as possible, right?
Yeah, and again, it does make the interior more durable, but it's increasing the susceptibility of the surface to receive environmental damage. So when the surface gets environmentally damaged, it makes the rest of the concrete more susceptible to environmental deterioration. So it's kind of a mixed bag there. They're looking at this, the interior, and not looking at the exterior, and the exterior is where it's receiving all the damage. So I that logic continues to escape me, because where I really saw there was a profound difference, this 1974 study by the Army Corps of Engineers, where they were evaluating concrete for nuclear vaults and storage. They were subjecting the concrete to excessive heat. Now, it was really interesting, as they kept drying the concrete out, even when they were able to dry out these big, thick sections of concrete by as much as a foot, the interior moisture content never changed. Now, people have said that, well, this migrates back and forth. No, it doesn't. Water moves to the cool side, and if you impress heat upon it, what will happen is, as you heat it, the alkalinity becomes more concentrated. So what happens as the alkalinity gets more concentrated, here's this buildup you have, reduces relative humidity. Well, sodium hydroxide can reduce humidity down below 8.5%. And it can remain, and that's when it starts to get damp. There's 8.5% relative humidity. Well, all this water behind it is wet. So when you apply enough heat to it, and then what happens is and here's the weird one, because this is not being incorporated in, when you get a really high concentration of sodium hydroxide, it actually causes the freeze point of water to accelerate. When you first add sodium hydroxide, it acts as an antifreeze, but then it goes in the opposite direction. And that's what people are not getting into their heads, is chemical reactions tend to not be linear. They'll be linear to a certain point, but what can happen is you can get a reversal depending on this concentration in its environment. So sodium hydroxide, as it gets towards that water phase, if it gets concentrated, say, to 80%, well, the freeze point of water at that point is 235 degrees Fahrenheit. That's past boiling point. So what will happen is it shears the concrete off. It explodes, basically. You have steam expansion.
Whoa.
So you've got this freezing water, all of a sudden, bang, it goes. And they haven't worked out the mechanisms for that yet. But if you connect the dots, the mechanisms make perfect sense. And I don't know why they're not doing that.
Where does that occur? Like, that reaction.
Oh, with the heat?
Yeah.
Like during fires. And concrete will sometimes explode during a fire.
Really?
Yeah. And steam expansion is very underrated. I learned in fire science that that, for example, if you go in a place where they have steel smelting, they're doing things like that, what you don't want to do is get anywhere near those, because if you remember Terminator 2, where they have that melted steel and everything else, if you threw a cup of water into that, it would instantaneously form 1,500 equivalent units of steam. That's one hell of a lot of expansion.
Yeah.
That's the explosion.
Oof. I was just thinking of all the well, for one, there's folks out there talking about, they like to post like your house wouldn't burn down if you had a concrete house or whatever.
Well, if they saw San Diego after those severe fires we had, even the chimneys were gone.
Really?
Yeah, if you get it hot enough, they will disintegrate, because part of cement has water incorporated into it. If you remove that, it wants to turn back into sand.
On top of the exploding steam.
So you got a big pile, what looks like a big pile of sand. That used to be a chimney or a wall.
Huh. Interesting.
Now, will it help? Oh, heck yeah, because concrete has really good heat resistance. But now, that's where I've talked to people where if you want to really make it durable, if you put in materials, say, like they have these things like they call them carbon nanotubes. If you put that, say, like as a coating on the concrete, or had it embedded in the concrete, what it would do is it would scatter the heat, so it would keep it from building up, so you wouldn't get the same kind of advance into the concrete. So there's ways of dealing with it, but again, people don't do it. If you're in
Right.
an area where there's a fire susceptibility, I would strongly recommend they go that direction.
Mm-hmm.
But again, they don't do it.
Huh. Always learning. Uh,
Yeah, I'm a
uh,
geek. I admit it.
that's why you're here. Uh, okay, so we talked about. Did you want to talk about this sweating slab syndrome, or what else
Yes,
did you want to hit on?
because that wraps it up really nicely.
Okay.
Because sweating slab syndrome, that was something I hypothesized again back in the 90s, mid to late 90s, and I was really berated for that. They said, "Oh, that can't happen," and sweating slab syndrome is just because it's a smooth surface and blah blah blah. I said, "No, it's mostly due to collection of salts." Well, this European symposia just finished and ran from September 22nd to September 24th. And two of the researchers from West Virginia Elster did a 20-year study on it and found that, yes, indeed, alkaline salts do tend to collect towards the surface and they do cause sweating slab syndrome. So I'm vindicated on that one as well. Now, if you couple that with what we've been talking about, why is that accumulating towards the surface? There's a dynamic going on there that violates what we're being taught as being factual. That water migrates up and does this, blah blah blah. Well, this ties in with other things I've seen with older slabs. We were out in San Leandro, because I told them how this would happen, and they'd never heard of it before, because the installers are saying, even though older concrete, when we measure with everything we've measured it with, it seems to be drier, but we have more problems with it than newer concrete. We have more moisture problems. I said, well, that's because of the accumulation of salts over the years. And I told them how to remove it. They need to grind it down or blast it and get past that layer, because it tends to accumulate in a very thin layer of concrete. But I said, what happens is the salts will move towards the warm air, because salts and the other chemicals get more chemically active with increasing temperature, even though the water wants to go the other way, it wants to move to the cool side. So you get a dynamic equilibrium after a while. No more water wants to come up and the salt doesn't want to go down, so it stays there. And they found that this lensing even happens on the ocean. So when that discovery came out, I go, yes, because now it's irrefutable. This is what happens. And so when West Virginia Elster came out with that study, I was just bouncing off the walls. I was so excited, because that and the recent discovery of how salt water will lens, and we have a misunderstanding of how climate changes and everything else. Now they have to rewrite all these textbooks. I'm going, yes. So what happens when they remove the floor, that equilibrium dynamic is now lost, because now you've exposed the surface to a brand new moisture source, which is the ambient conditions. The ambient conditions are normally warmer than the concrete, so it pulls right in. It's attracted by the salts. It acts like a calcium chloride test in reverse. It's pulling it into the concrete rather than out.
Oh.
So what happened, not 3 months later after teaching this group went out there to show them how to use a moisture meter. So they took an area of this 40-plus-year-old concrete slab warehouse. They tested it, was 1.9%, very dry, which that's to be expected with that older concrete. Then they removed the curing compound or whatever was else on there. It might have been just a really good steel trowel finish or whatever. And they tested again. It was 1.9%. Well, they left and came back. When they put the meter back down, it jumped to 4.3% in less than 15 minutes. That's how quickly moisture can absorb into the concrete. Now, that's always blamed on moisture originating from the concrete. That is not true. Most of what we see originates from the ambient conditions, which ties in again with that gradient portion of the concrete. That is your weak, permeable, porous area of your concrete. Even with older concrete, that's true to a certain extent, but what happens, the gradual migrating salt contributes to that issue. So the concrete we're seeing today is going to have a horrible issue as compared to the concrete in the past, because now we have more alkalinity to deal with.
Is there a way to measure how much salt is on the surface other than The
We did that with a company a few years ago because we couldn't understand what was going on, why we couldn't dry it out. Because
Yeah.
back then I didn't understand the dynamics. We kept trying to dry out the concrete and it wouldn't dry. So they did an analysis, and the salt content was estimated to be between 50 and 60 sodium hydroxide, 50 and 60% concentration. Well, I didn't know about how it would cause a reduction in relative humidity, because at 60%, it will reduce the relative humidity down to 50%. So if you're using dehumidifiers that aren't capable of drawing the moisture down below 50%, it's not going to remove any of the water. It just stays there. There's no reason. There's no compelling reason for it to move, because you have to reduce it below the threshold that it's at. But I realized that's a self-defeating goal. You have to just remove the salt, because if you don't, what happens? It keeps increasing, and and that's, again, we're not learning enough about the basics of concrete to really understand how to dry it. Because when I've talked to drying experts, they said, "Why does it keep rebounding?" I said, "Well, that's when it rebounds. That's its actual dry point." Well, it varies. I said, "Yes, and it will," because again, it's your hygroscopic equilibrium point. That's what it is for that. Now, if it has that for the salt, that's too high, because one, it's alkaline. Two, it's just too wet. You're not going to get anything to stick to it, and it's not going to stay down once you try to put something else down there, unless you remove the salt layer. So now that this has been established as a fact, I think we can use this as a basis for really addressing these issues and putting out better concrete. And that's the justification for making concrete that's self-curing and internally cured. Because if you don't do it, we're not going to take care of this. It doesn't matter what you do to the concrete, how dense you make it, how much water you take out of it. We're just again, we're running this hamster wheel. We're not progressing. We're just simply repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do we remove the salt layer again? Remind
Pardon?
me. How do we remove the salt layer?
I tell people shot blast it.
Just shot
And
blast.
I use a meter, because a meter will give you an instant reading, because the moisture will concentrate where the salt layer is, and then once the moisture meter readings drop to where it's at a good dry level, then you can go ahead and apply a floor. But I tell them as a buffer, I like it when they use something like, I don't want to use proprietary names, but I will, like a Mapei or an Ardex, where you put down basically a cementitious layer, which puts a buffer between any of the residual salts that may still be around, and basically a clean layer of cement. Then you can put your floor down, because by the time you put your floor down, your coating, it gives enough time to set and cure before the salts invade the area, and will no longer damage the floor.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna. You could just change the climate of where the floor is, right?
Yes.
And put your floor down.
Yeah, blow air on it, get it dry.
Yeah.
Put a buffer in there. There's several ways of dealing with it, and they've all been successful, depending on how bad and how deep the salt layer is. Because if the salt layer is too deep, it gets really pricey trying to shot blast that, because then you got to fill it back up and recap the darn thing, and that can get pretty expensive.
Yeah, I would think that would be your last. Yeah,
Huh?
I would think that's your last option is shot blasting,
Yeah.
like if nothing else works.
Well, a light shot blast will sometimes give you enough. Then you put down a granular layer or cementitious layer, just enough, again, to get the coating down and allow it to set and cure. Because once they set and cure, that salt does a whole bunch of nothing.
Yeah. All right. Well, did we hit on everything?
I think so.
For today, at least. I know we could keep going.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just, but again, like I said, having that last bit of confirmation it's wonderful because we can actually take that information and apply this to roads and bridges. We can make extremely durable roads and bridges by simply monitoring the effect. And so they can actually put out, for example, concrete mix designs where they can find out and they put the monitoring out where they have the embedded humidity and your thermocouples, and while the concrete's being placed and cured, they can actually monitor it, determine the RH is remaining above 80%. If it's not, then they know they're using the wrong type of concrete. So they can actually put in good types of concrete, and they will know immediately if the concrete's going to be durable. We don't have to wait years down the road to figure it out. We can actually monitor this on the front end, determine the type of concrete quality we need, or whatever else we need to add to it, to keep the relative humidity above 80%, get the optimum development of cement, and have nice durable concrete. Because that concrete will give us at least 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not getting that. We're seeing repairs on roads as early as 10 to 12 years. And that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it'll get worse if we don't do this.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll stop there for today. Bob, if folks, I know you were going around and you did a building science, I guess, seminar, right?
Yeah, in Jacksonville a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, if folks want to reach out to you and hear you talk about that, or just get your opinion on something, what's the best way?
The best way is go through you, because or say organizations such as the National Floor Covering Association and IAQ Radio, for example. I'm going to be speaking this Friday on IAQ Radio, which is indoor air quality, because this ties in with that, and RIA, which is the Restoration Industry Association. There's other groups like this, and again, through your concrete podcast, I'll make the information available at no charge through your organization, because I want people to go in and get educated so they can start applying this information. Because I've seen the information when I try to give it to them, a lot of it is very difficult to interpret properly, and so if they can get educated through groups like this, where we can take it step at a time, it will help them understand what they're reading, because some of this is so convoluted. It's like a petrographic analysis. If you don't know how to read it, there's all kinds of things you can extrapolate from it.
Right. All right. Sounds good. Yeah. So if you want to get a hold of Bob, reach out to me, and I'll get you in the right direction. Bob, thanks for coming back on the show today.
Well, thank you, Seth.
Yes, sir. And till next time, let's keep it concrete.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right. Let's see. All right.